where the trials were held.
Oh, did you? When was that?
Oh, 10 years ago. We were on a river cruise,
Right.
and so we got to go there just to see it, but there's nothing that was going on. You say, well, I was there. Right?
Well, you could go in and say that you met the guy.
Right. Well, I did do that. That's by my own claim to fame, except marrying Jean. Get that in.
Get that in.
Right.
So, Bill, were you destined to be a lawyer? I mean, was that, your dad was in the practice, but was that kind of a foregone conclusion?
Not by anybody's. No, not really. I don't know what other particular choice there would be. I really don't know. I never, quite frankly, came from a family that didn't push, because the family was always in the Observer, this side of the family. And if you didn't want to go into newspaper writing or anything like that, you look for something else. But the door was always open to continue with the newspaper, And so I guess I really never made that decision until actually I got into college, probably my freshman year in college. So.
Well, talk a little bit about your family, the Foley family, and the Observer. What was that?
It's the Williams side.
Oh, Williams side. Yeah, please.
Did you know Kirk Williams?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. He was my cousin.
Okay.
And well, I don't do.
My worst night. Listen, I tell everybody, make sure you turn the darn thing on.
Well, I don't have mine on, so.
Yeah, I'm the worst offender here.
No, the Williams side of the family was where the newspaper came in. My great-grandfather formed the Observer, and it just came passed on down through my uncle, my great-uncle, who was Kirk's grandfather, and then my grandfather became the publisher, and then when he passed on, then Jack Williams, Kirk's father, and then after that came his Kirk's son, H.K. Williams. I can remember that because they all had the same, on that side of the family all had that. So, it came down all that time. So, 125 years in the family.
Was that a tough decision to sell out to the Ogden publication post?
Not as far as I was concerned. I think Kirk did just beautifully, just right, he called it. And the Ogden people wanted the newspapers in this area, and Kirk was ready to get out. I don't think he wanted to, and his son probably really couldn't handle it. He was a good writer and things, and he worked in that type of the side of the newspaper, the editorials and that, but he could never have handled the business side that Kirk did. And so I think Kirk saw the handwriting on the wall, and Ogden's came along and he sold it. And I got to tell you, I was perfectly happy, really happy myself, because all I did was provide local counseling to, if they were buying something or whatever, that's what I did, or my father did, with the Observer. But other than that, we had I was just one of the what I call the fourth stockholder in the place. So I had a very vested interest, obviously. So, but anyways, that's how it happened. Was 125 years in the same family. So.
Wow, that's an amazing story. On your dad's side, your dad was a lawyer. Was his family in the law practice?
No, I know that the other side of the family is almost entirely different. His father was a Canadian to begin with. He was born in Canada. I never found out, that was on my fault, how that side of the family came together, because he was a Canadian. He had come to Canada sometime around 1850, and he lived there. His family lived up north of Toronto, and how he ended up marrying my grandmother, I do not know, because she comes from Germany, and the family came from Germany around 1800, a little bit earlier than that, as just farmers, pure and out farmers, and they settled in Eden, and they were, as a matter of fact, that house, his father, that house is still in Eden. People are living in it today. But they were, as I call them, dirt farmers. They raised food,
Right.
and somehow my father or grandfather and grandmother got together, and he became a United States citizen, grandfather, then ended up somehow moving to Dunkirk and around 1900. But he went to work for Alco, American Locomotive, and he was a die maker. And he worked on the floor when they're building the steam engines up there. Eventually he became a floor manager, and then somehow he ended up becoming a councilman of the city of Dunkirk.
Oh.
So, and I never knew either one of them. So, but so they really had no connection as far as anything with the law or what have you. So,
And then along comes your dad, and where did he go to law school?
Michigan,
Michigan?
University of Michigan.
Go blue.
Yeah. Well, actually, he started out at George Washington University in Washington. He was there for the 3 years, and then he found that he could go on. So he found out that if he wanted to, he could apply to Michigan at the end of his 3rd year in Washington and stay 2 years in Michigan. I think it was 2 years, and he would come out with a degree in Washington and a degree in Michigan. He did it. So, and I mean, they didn't have, any more than the workmen, because it was my grandfather on that side providing whatever there was, So he worked when he was in Washington. One of his. Did I ever tell you that story?
No, go ahead.
His one contribution, other than waiting on tables in the fraternity house, he was a Sigma Nu. He was hired, if you call it that, to sing in the cathedral, the big cathedral, the Washington Cathedral, and they were building it all that time. But he was paid to sing on Sundays or whenever else in the paid choir of the National Cathedral, which I always thought was pretty good thing. And so that's how he put himself through college, is waiting on tables and singing in the Washington Cathedral. So beyond that, I don't really know too much about it. He never really got into it as far as how he got back and forth to Michigan and that sort of thing, But
Was it clear to him that he'd be coming here to Dunkirk?
Probably.
Yeah.
I think he had 2 brothers and a sister here, and everybody lived here.
Right.
Nobody went very far. Same as my family. Everybody lives here.
Yeah.
Nobody's gone very far, So even the grandchildren, they stay here.
Yeah. Well, it's fun.
Oh yeah, it's fun for Gene and me, because we want to see one of the kids. We go see one of the kids, right here.
So your dad, when he came back here, did he know any kind of, was it a general practice? Was he with somebody that?
Oh yeah, he was with. Now this is where you're going to catch me. He came back, and he clerked for. Oh come on, Bill. Who he clerked for was the fellow who was at that time, the district attorney. And this is 1930, probably earlier than that. It's probably somewhere between 1930 and 1934, I would think, is when the air. And very prominent lawyer in Fredonia is Bill Stearns. Yeah, and his home was up on Central Avenue, and my father went to work for him and clerked for him, and then he eventually moved to Dunkirk, and he had an office on Central Avenue, right next to the railroad tracks. But I'm trying to think of the fellow's name. Took him under his wing because his older attorney needed somebody to work with him. And it was Betsy Reed. Do you remember Betsy Reed? The family owned the radiator plant.
Okay, yes.
Okay, and her father was an attorney, and he took my father in, and they stayed in this office down on Central Avenue, right next to the tracks. And then when they built the Chautauqua National Bank at the corner of 4th, the two of them moved. Each had their own separate office now. My father got the smaller office. I'm going to change the name. Tom Heffernan is the attorney.
Yeah.
And Tom Heffernan took the bigger office and what have you, and my father took the smaller one. My father, I think, moved in there somewhere around 1940, and he started paying rent for himself, $50 a month. We left there in 1976, and we were still paying $50 a month. right up to that was being paid to the Chautauqua National or whichever bank. If it happened to be HSBC, could have been for all I know, but it was still $50. And Dave Duino was, by that time, had been the president or whatever is down there. And he never said a word about it. Never. We didn't have to pay any of the utilities or anything. It was just
What a deal.
what a deal. The only problem, you had to walk to the second floor.
Yeah.
So then I built the building we were in.
So what kind of practice did your dad have?
General.
General practice?
Very, very. I mean, that's at that time really, for most people had a general practice. That's my take on it. You probably see a lot more of it, but you had the specialists that did things, but I was always conscious of the fact of a general practitioner. So.
But one of the things I always affiliated your dad was sort of with fire associations.
Mm-hmm.
How did he get connected with that?
We got connected with it primarily because he was, before he was married and after he got involved with the Dunkirk fire department as at that time it was, you didn't have any position other than the fact that you were a fireman, volunteer. And he was in that kind of company, hose company number 1, and he was in it before he married. I know that. I know he did it because he slept. I think it was 2 nights a week in the barracks or whatever it is, because that's when the volunteers had to do that. You had to do that something like 4 years. You had to do it, and then after the 4 years, you could claim exempt status, and so you didn't have to run to the fires. But somehow he just continued. I know he used to go to the firemen's conventions here in Western New York. Got to know people from the eastern part of the state, all over New York, from Long Island right out to Ripley.
Yeah.
Got to know everybody and their brother, and eventually he ended up on the board. And then in 1946, he was elected president of the volunteer firemen of the state of New York. And it was a 2-year term, and then he moved on. Ultimately, he was also a member of the Firemen's Home, which is down on the Hudson River, and he became counsel for them and their lobbyist. Jeez, I got to think about all that. He'd been with it, and as I say, he'd been counsel and their lobbyists, and he had an office in New York City in one of the hotels, not a big hotel, but one of the hotels there. He had an office they gave him, and that part of it was that he would participate in the investment side of the volunteer firemen. They had, my recollection, a pretty good portfolio, enough that they had a broker from New York City, and my father would go down there, well, not several, but enough times to know that he's been in New York City. I even got to the point when I was in law school, I would go down. I knew he was going to be in New York City, and I would get on the train, go down. He'd take me to dinner, and then we went to a Broadway show. I saw more Broadway shows. I mean, all, back then in the 50s,
Sure.
and that was a thing that I remember too. But he as they say, he was a lobbyist too, and so during the session, the New York legislative session, he had another office in Albany, and so he would get on he and Bruce Manley. Did you know Bruce Manley?
Yeah.
He and Bruce Manley would get on the train because the train would stop in Dunkirk. I think Bruce had lined that all up, and it was the Empire Express. How they did it, I don't know. And they would get on, I think, Sunday night, because they had to be there Monday morning for 3 days when the session was. And so they would get down there. Bruce was going down as an assemblyman, and my father was going down as a lobbyist, And so that lasted for some time, and as they say, it lasted the entire time I was in law school in Albany Law. So, and in that I got to eat at my father he joined the Fort Orange Club, which was pretty. I know how he did it. Another fireman, volunteer fireman from that area around South Albany, comes from an old family. Even a friend of my father's, because they're firemen, and he got him a position, or got a membership into the Fort Orange Club, which meant that on Monday nights, during the session, not every Monday night, but I got to go to dinner at the Fort Orange Club. And the neat thing about that one was that he and I would go, and I would sometimes take a classmate with me, and he'd get our dinner, and sitting right over there in a great big round table was the New York State Court of Appeals. That court came to dinner.
No kidding.
And
wow.
On Monday nights, they were there, my father and me. My father knew a couple of those people, because the volunteer firemen and the firemen and the lobbyists and all that sort of thing kind of mixed. They know each other from what hat they were wearing. A lot of those judges and things like that were volunteer firemen. That was back in the big days of volunteer firemen.
Yeah.
Big, not like today where they got posted signs out here saying, we want, please. So that's and of course he maintained the practice here, and then when I came, I continued it too. So.
And wasn't it through that lobbying effect that somehow that's when you went to Washington and met Jackson?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was in the 40s.
Okay.
And it was because, but that wasn't part of the fireman one. That was when he was city attorney.
Okay.
And he was elected. I was thinking maybe you would be asking, and I'm trying to think. I think he was elected the first time because it was a political office, and I think it was something like 1935 or 36 that he was elected city attorney, and he was right up until 1946, I think. I'm trying to think where I was. It had to be 46 or 47, and the city of Dunkirk was always Democratic. Mm-hmm. The fact that any Republican ever happened. And then in 1946 or 47, the Republicans put forth a list and included the Wheelers and Joe Rubenstein, and I'm trying to think of 3 or 4, and they wiped the Democrats out. It all became Republican. No. So that was the last my father was in that. Although he did run for assemblyman later on, and it was when I was in high school. He said I remember saying it was his turn in the box or something like that. He had to run. He knew he wasn't going to win, but he did it, So but that was the end of his actual political ambitions or anything. I think he would have done, he could have done well if he wanted to be a Republican. He could, back then when I got out of the service and I'd had 3 years of prosecution, I knew kind of what I was doing, but I couldn't get a, Sidney Hughes said he could not hire me as an assistant district attorney as long as I was a Democrat.
No kidding.
So I changed. I quickly changed, and that following year I came a DA for 34 years.
Yeah. So. So back to the Jackson story. I don't want to lose that.
Oh yes.
How was he? He was in Washington and basically took you along.
Yes, he actually took on the one occasion that I'm thinking about it. Although I went once, but we all did. My sister, my mother, and we went down there for spend the week or whatever it was. He initially was going down there primarily because of the Dunkirk airport, and that was where the Dunkirk airport was being put together. I've told you that story.
I forget. Go ahead. My age.
Right. Yeah. Right. By the way, I'm going to say this part of the story I have told somebody else. I've told this fellow. He lives in Jamestown, and he is writing a book or something about. I'm trying to think.
Airports.
Airports. Yeah. You know who I'm talking about there?
Yeah, I know. I've read that he's working on it, right?
Right, and he interviewed me over the telephone.
Okay.
So at that time, one of the what was the family that was running the Nalbones, and now the Nalbones referred him to me because the Nalbones knew my side of the story with my father.
Yeah.
And but that happened in about 1940. Yeah, 1940. This very, very good friend of my father's, Bill Coleman, who lived around the corner in Dunkirk from my father when they were all growing up. He was at that time, the Army Air Corps, if that's what it was, something. But he was a major, and this is before the war. And he was flying out of Selfridge Field outside of Detroit. And it must be getting it must have been closer to 41, because somehow he got a hold of my father and said to him that the War Department is out trying to locate areas of certain requirements for the construction of airports in the event we ever went to war with both, but primarily Germany. And that if a city or a community or anything like that was interested, they better get on their horse and do something about it, like go to Washington or whatever. And my father did. He got but he was city attorney at the same time, all through this. And so he had talked to these members of the Common Council, and they kind of gave him the authority to find out what it was all about. The members of the Common Council really turned anything outside of the city of Dunkirk over to my father, and other things too. There are a lot of other little things, but if there's negotiations, the Common Council guys were more interested in whether the streets are getting plowed or in that sort of thing. It was that type. They did not want to get involved in it. I guess they thought my father had the education, was an attorney, he could do it, and they wouldn't involve, so they just dumped it all on him. And so he went to Washington a couple of times on his own and got after the war was declared, they had said that they wanted another relief airport outside the city of Buffalo, in the event that the Germans or whoever else could get to the Buffalo one and destroy it, or any of the other airports, I gather, and pick one, and they picked the area of the city of out there in Sheridan.
No kidding.
And then so they actually, what he turned over to him was he had to go out, and they picked out the area, they knew what they wanted. I'm talking about the federal government. And they knew what they wanted, and they put him in charge of getting people to sign over their properties. I don't know what the terms or anything like that, whether that they were all going to be paid or they weren't going to pay it, or they was just going to be taken by eminent domain type of thing. I wasn't aware of it and never really knew about that, but somehow that's basically what they did, was they got him to go out there and tell the people that they want to condemn their property. I guess that's what they were going to condemn it, and because of the national need. And the vast majority of people, whatever arrangements were being made, did it, but there were a couple of them out there. I always remember my father coming home one day and telling my mother that somebody stood on their front porch of their farmhouse with a shotgun and told him to get off their property, which he did. So I do remember that one. It ran through the house. But eventually he had to go back and forth to Washington to meet with him. So he during the war too, but because of his position as a city attorney, he got a larger gas allowance. He got a C sticker. Ah. You're too young to remember all that.
I remember people talk about
right. The rations on it. He got a C sticker. I don't know whether else. So he drove back and forth. There really, other than getting on a train, that's the only other way you could really get to Washington. And then you have to go like this. And so he would go, and that's the couple of times that he took all of us, my mother, my sister, and me.
And he knew Jackson through Democratic politics?
Here.
Yep.
He knew him from politics in Chautauqua County. Yeah. Well, I always said he and Jackson are the only two Democrats, lawyers and thing. That's not true, but I mean, it was just that's why, because they really were the only two that I knew, and there weren't many others. There were a couple from Jamestown and what's his name up in Brockton. Oh, Anthony. God, I can't remember his up there, but he was the other Democrat that I knew. Yeah, he was an attorney. Yeah. But so I just remember we were either. My father called him or whatever it is, but to talk to him, and that's when I got to meet him myself, and whether you know the rest of the story.
Well, what a thrill it must have been to go into the corner and to sit in his chair.
Yeah. I mean, he asked me, "You want to sit there, young man?" So I said, I guess I did that.
Yeah. What a thrill.
It was, so.
Did your dad have an impression of Jackson at all? Did he ever talk about him, other than as a fellow Democrat politician?
I honestly said I wouldn't know. I mean, I can't remember any specific thing that he did. Although I would say he considered him to be a friend. I know that because I know he'd talked to him on different occasions, but it probably would, I don't know what that would be that he would have anything in common with him as far as business is concerned. There's nothing that reached the levels of the Supreme Court or anything like that. It was more just being friends down, So, no, I can't honestly say that I recall anything specifically. The one thing that bothers me, my father was a great diary writer, not on a daily basis, but whenever he did something, or going someplace, he would. I've searched high and low because he kept them in a little book of some sort of, he'd keep these different things. And I always thought there would be one around here that chronicled that activity during the Second World War, but I can't say that. I know he ended up on, that was the state of New York. He ended up on some sort of a war board or something in the state of New York, but I don't really remember anything about that. So
then you decide to go to law school, having graduated from Allegheny College.
yeah.
Was Allegheny a natural choice for you, being fairly close, or had there been anybody else in your family gone there?
I had an aunt that went there.
Yeah.
That went there. I don't know. I just it was with me. It was a progression. You were in grade school. You were in this, and you picked a college. You went to college. The idea of what it was, who it was, anything like that, as long as it had a reputation of something good, I did. It was, I suppose, closeness wasn't really, but it was close. So I had 3 friends in my class, high school, that went to Allegheny at the same time. Glenn Gardner, Jim Pomeroy. Who the hell was the third one? There was a Stonefoot out in Sheridan, but he was a little ahead of me. But there was another one. So we all kind of separated too when you got to Allegheny.
You a fraternity guy? You a Phi Delta?
Yep.
I thought that was...
Wait, weren't you with Chidell?
Yeah, brothers in the bond.
Well,
Yeah.
I thought you were. Yeah. No, and I have 2 sons that went to Allegheny, and neither one of them joined. They both became Phi Psis, except David did. David was only there for a year, and he had that back end injury, and they wanted him to stay here. So, but he and then Scott, was also a Phi Psi. And so.
Well, interesting, because I was the reverse. My dad was a Phi Psi. He was in Allegheny, and I went to Phi Delta. So.
Was that okay?
Small world department.
So, no,
And why Albany Law School? Was that a normal progression too from here?
No, but I think I was that one. My father encouraged. I got accepted into nothing. I didn't know Yale or anything like that. I think I applied there, but I wasn't accepted there. But I was accepted in the University of Virginia and the University of Arizona. I forget there was another university, and my father said, if you're gonna practice law in the state of New York, you go to law school in New York State. So that's kind of the way I ended up in Albany Law, which I'm very glad we did. But at the time, Albany Law School was a smaller law school, but it was I think an excellent one. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, everybody kind of knew everybody, and but it was good for me, and so it probably saved me, because if I got in a school like the University of Virginia, I would have been a classmate, I think, or something of Kennedy. What's the younger one? Not Jack.
Robert?
No, not Robert.
Ted?
Ted.
Yeah.
I couldn't have not moved in a climate quite like that,
So you graduated from Dunkirk High School. What year? What was your class year?
52.
52, and then 55 would have been Albany. Or did you go? You were in the service for a period of time?
Yeah, 3 years.
3 years?
Yeah, I was a JAG officer.
Okay.
Yeah, but I was law school. I graduated high school. I Allegheny to 56, and then 56 I went on. Albany, Allegheny was 52 to 56. Then I went to Albany Law, but I had joined, back in 52, 53, the Korean War was just finishing. They had mandatory ROTC at Allegheny for the first 2 years. There was still the thought that the war was cranking down, but that it was still subject to the draft. And had marks that got me, and they said, we will take you into advanced ROTC in the Air Force if you want to sign up for it. And I said, yeah. So I did say it, and so I would get a deferment every year I was in law school. At the end of the year, I had to submit my record for the year of what I passed, and then they'd give me another extension. So I did that. I had already, when I was in law school, I'd already come out as a lieutenant. That's when when I finished Allegheny, that's when I got sworn in as an officer in the reserve. So I stayed with it, and then every year they extended me, and then right after that they said, okay, we want you. So they did. I got called, and I ended up in the JAG office in Stewart Air Force Base outside of Nashville, which wasn't bad. Gene and I were both, by that time, we were married at the same time. We just got married, and we ended up going to outside of Nashville. And that's when Nashville was just old at that time. I mean, there were no bars. There's beer bars, but there was very, very little type of that activity there. But it was very interesting. It was I liked it at the time, but we were about 30 miles outside of Nashville on the base, and so we spent most of our time on the base.
Grand Ole Opry.
Oh yeah, right, in the old Ryman Theater.
Sure.
Oh yes, we did that, and that's what we would do. It is entertainment, but we both were very happy we were in the service. We were away from family, both sides of the family. We were really on our own, and experience being a JAG officer. It's all prosecution, most of it. They gave us some privates, things to do, like housing and that sort of stuff. We had to work out details for airmen and things, but mainly it was a prosecution. So for 3 years, I did that. I went in as lieutenant, came out as a captain, and the last year that I was there, I was the staff judge advocate. I was the officer in charge at that time, so it didn't hurt by any means. I really thought it would.
So you learned a tremendous skill set.
Quickly.
Yeah.
A little bit different than civil prosecution. Down there, it was hanging on the side of the law, on the judicial side or prosecution side. But no, it was fair. It was just good. It took the rough edges off.
Yeah. So when you finally muster out, was it clear that you were coming back here?
Oh yes, yeah. Actually, in different ways, because my father, I was coming out in, I think it was March, and sometime, I think it was in December of 62, 63, somewhere in there, my father had a heart attack right here in this house. And he was, being in self-practice at that time. And so they said that they would give me an early withdrawal, and I got a short one. I think it was a couple of months. And so that I could come home and take over. I'd never done that at all, but that type of law. But I came out, and he was back in work, but not doing anything like courts or anything. So that's the reason I came back. I didn't give much thought about staying on. They offered to keep me on and give me a permanent position, as a rank of captain, but the other things were things we had to do with my father, firm, which I'm satisfied.
You came back which was a general practice, but your ilk was going to be prosecution.
No.
No?
No, I wouldn't. I had more thoughts about doing that. It's just a question of earning enough money, and that all came about in the same way, is that they were, I forget, somebody, Sidney Hughes.
Sidney Hughes, yeah.
Sidney Hughes was the DA at that time. O'Connor was on the bench. Ed lived in that house right there at the time. And so they were going to nominate the next position of the second district attorneys, not the first, but the second or even the third. And then somebody became aware that I had, from the day I became not even an attorney, selected my party. My father's a Democrat, so I signed up as a Democrat. Well, the Republican hierarchy found that out right down. I didn't get the position so I had to cool my heels for a year and quietly became a Republican. And it did, and then immediately afterwards, I got a position as a prosecutor in Chautauqua County.
Under Sid Hughes.
Under Sid Hughes, yeah.
What was he like?
He was a nice, he was fine. I mean, he wasn't the bombastic type like Ed O'Connor was, did you know Ed?
I did.
Okay, well, Ed was, he was every place, and you knew when he was in the room and that sort of thing. But Sidney was quiet. He went about his business, and I think he was the DA for about 4 years while I was still there, and then he just left. Didn't run the last time, and I always heard that he ended up somewhere along the Gulf Coast in retirement. But there was some, I do remember a couple of things. I know I can't even go there because he got into some sort of an argument with a neighbor, and there were a couple of other things, and I think he was just reached an age where he didn't want to stick around anymore, and he just said he wasn't going to run again. So, did you know him?
Well, ironically, when it all came down, Sherry Cadwell, who was my mentor, Cadwell and Sharp, that was my firm, and Sherry had, Sid Hughes was in our office of counsel.
Oh, okay, all right.
Previously, way back when Sherry was a young attorney, it was Rogerson and Hughes. Russ Rogerson and
Should
Hughes.
get that.
Okay. And so Sid Hughes would occasionally come in the office. That's what I remember. Big guy.
Yes, big guy. Yep. Yeah, nice guy too. I say, we had no problems or anything with him. I stayed. I think I served under 6 or 7 DAs in that 34 years I was there.
Can you name them? So after Sid Hughes, then who was it?
Oh boy, I'm trying to think. Bob Sullivan. Let's see. Bob Sullivan. My problem is the
King?
names.
Was King?
Yeah, he was in there. I can't get him in the pecking order.
Okay.
But yes, he was there, and that's when, for a period of about a 6-month period, when King was killed or died, or I became the acting district attorney at that time. Jim Subject, even what's his name? He's there right now. Well, he's around here. Tony Spann's old partner.
Assignment was what?
When I first started out, I was the district attorney second, or whatever they call him, the second tier, and I was assigned everything kind of from the ridge all towards this direction. I had all the township, had every township on this side, and also the city of Dunkirk and the village of Fredonia, all the villages on this side. Actually, there was something like between all the town justices on this side of the county and those things. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 jurisdictions.
My golly.
Well, of course, what's his name? Bob Seidel, who came at about the same time.
Right.
He was a little bit ahead of me, and he had all the other side,
Yeah.
Jamestown and what have you. I mean, that, when you think about it, because there was only, what, 3, there was the DA and 3 district attorneys, assistant district attorneys. There was me and Bob Seidel and Bob Sullivan, I think, and trying to think, there was one other one.
Ron Gibbs, was he part of that?
Yes, he was at one time. Yep. Mm-hmm. Not, he was a little bit later.
Okay.
But those are, so there was actually 4 assistants and the DA. And they got the 2, like Bob Sullivan, doing all the felonies, and dividing it that way, and whoever's on the other side, and then the 4 assistant district attorneys that handled all the townships and the local judges or courts.
Augie Jankowski.
Mm-hmm.
I know you appeared before him quite a bit.
Whoa.
Give me some stories.
Oh, I was always amazed at Augie. I mean, you could go the whole day and not knew the fact, and it's not laughing, but there would be occasions that attorneys come up from out of Buffalo and you have him before the bunch, and he's carrying on just like everything else, and an attorney that doesn't know him, he is at the bench, and he said, "Judge, I want to show you this," no idea he couldn't see a thing, and the fact that and he'd handle everything but he was, I mean, he amazed as far as I'm concerned, because he could take a jury trial, he could charge the jury trial with the actual law involving the case and the factual one, and blend them in together. I don't ever remember a time when his handicap caused any difficulty or any row of any sort in the 34 years that I was there with him. I shouldn't say 34 with him, because his term for me was about 27 years, because after that, then Walt Drag became court, and Walter was very good too. He was a good city court judge. Augie was too, but it always amazed him, and he, he's friendly. He liked to stop off and have a drink now and then wherever he was going. And he'd walk all the way home. He worked at City Hall, and he'd walk all the way out Route 5 to Harrisburg. He had the dog, and he just, when the weather was good, he'd walk all the way home, and crossing Route 5 and what have you. But he was just a pretty nice guy.
And I had a clerk. Was her name Esther?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Esther Doltz.
Yeah.
Right? Esther was... Esther, if she wanted to express her feelings or about somebody or other, she did. She wouldn't hold back. So, no, I liked Esther too. She did. She ran a good tight ship, and she obviously quietly assisted him, and if there was a charge that had to be given on a particular crime that wouldn't be one that he could, she would, at some stage in the whole proceeding, read the charge to him so that he could be aware of what it was, and that was for her function, besides being the clerk of the court too. So.
Also, I just was there once or twice, but I remember him sort of staring at a calendar. If it came up with a date, even though he probably couldn't see the calendar, he would just sort of look there.
Right. Everybody, you're sure.
He assumed he was focusing in on it. Yeah. Right.
So, but he was a city court judge for a long time. He did run against Leetown Adams for county court judge, and doggone almost beat him. I mean, it was close. It was right down that the Lee was saved by the village of Silver Creek or the town of Hanover, one of them, but the village. That's where he won the case or won the election. Other than that, Augie had done very well around the state or the county of Chautauqua. So
that's when my wife was.
Excuse me.
Sure, my wife was a clerk for Judge Adams, and had, the first law clerk.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And so they referred to that as landslide Lee. I think on that particular one you're talking about.
Right.
Did you get a chance? Tell me about Lee Town Adams. I mean, he was talk about eclectic. What was your impressions of kind of him?
Oh, I don't know. He and I don't want to say did battle, but he could, I don't say take a burn, but he would get upset if something didn't go his way. And in prosecuting on the county level, because there came a time during that 20 or 34 years, I was the second assistant DA for the northern end, and I was doing the felonies for I don't know how many years, but several years, and stuff that while Lee was on the bench too, and there were 2 or 3 occasions when a case was tried and a jury was there, and Lee made some rulings that tossed me out of court or something. So I took appeals to the appellate division, and then in a couple of them, on to the Court of Appeals. And each one of those, he was reversed. And he just did not like that. So it wasn't easy to continue. Well, I mean, you got to be aware. I just have to be aware that there's certain thoughts that he has in his mind, and that he's going to do it. But I was always kind of happy when they had, especially at the Court of Appeals level, to have them rule that his decision wasn't right, where a case was tossed where I can't remember all of them, Greg, but I mean there was cases that his ruling just didn't fit with the way I thought it was, and took the appeal and had whatever his decision was overruled, and we could go back and try it again. So
your good friend Jeff Passafaros knew that I was coming here, and he said he gave me some notes. He said you might get Judge or Bill to talk about a time appearing before the Court of Appeals and being greeted by the chief judge who knew your dad.
Yeah.
So how'd that happen?
I don't know. I know the case, but that was the attorney on that one was. I see. He was a big, heavy-set guy.
Charlie Lovin?
No, not one. No, the other one. He was a public defender.
Okay.
He was the one that had he always had his secretary with him in tow.
Bruce Carpenter.
Yes.
Bruce, yes.
Yes. Okay, all right. And that's what it was. And it was an appeal. It was a case of some sort of gambling that was taking place in Altec Steel. And the Dunkirk police got onto it. We had a conviction, but Bruce takes the appeal up through to the appellate, to the Court of Appeals, and they go, and we arguing the case. Bruce made his argument first. I'm second,
right.
And the entire bench is there, including the Chief Justice. And do you remember what his name was? I can't remember what it was. And I knew that my father knew justice. That's all I could tell you. That, again, if you want my opinion, I think that the chief judge at one time or another was involved in the firematic things of the fire, of the volunteer fire, and he knew my father from years back. That because my father traveled all over the state of New York when he was the attorney for them, and when he was the president, and he had to do that. So I'm pretty sure that was the connection. And my father had mentioned, I had told him that I was going, and that's when he told me that he was a friend of this judge. And I didn't pay much attention to things. So, but I'm now standing up to make my argument on the thing, and because my name had come up, and it's Albert Foley, and I'm making the pitch and getting questions coming back, and I just remembered what it did was, all of a sudden, the chief judge went, "Oh," and just like that, looked directly at me, and did like this, and he connected it. I know he connected with the name and me and what have you to my father. That's as close as it did. That I did not go anything or try to influence him at all, but I do remember that happening, so.
That's fascinating. Now, Jeff also told me, he said, you had a strange prosecution of a cult-like figure in Stockton Hills.
It was rather an unusual case, and I can't all remember, but it was when I was a trustee in bankruptcy. And that's what it does. And there was a fellow up there that he was sitting on his land, and the fellow had his farm up there, and the Internal Revenue had come along, and he owed all this money, and the Internal Revenue foreclosed on the property, and my client, I guess it wasn't had anything to do with being a trustee on this one. This was more that I was representing a fellow, and he bid on it from the Internal Revenue, their judgment or what it is, and he won it. I mean, he won the thing, and so we tried to get him off the property, and then this guy, an eviction, and then trying to get the Internal Revenue to back everything up, which they did, and then this guy, and he just absolutely would not move, and it got down to a point where I'm trying to think who we used. It was, whether it was the sheriff, I'm pretty sure it was the sheriff, and to evict him from a farm, which included something like 400 bales of hay, and so the sheriffs had come in and brought their people, and then the client, I guess, paid to have all of the stuff of this guy taken, hauled off this farm. But I can't remember what his, when they say cult, I can't remember. I remember there's some strange going on, but I really can't remember if that's the name that you mentioned sounds like the one I'm talking about.
Probably, and Jeff was doing this. Among the bar members, Bill, I'm looking really at a very bad, composite, if you will, and hard for me because I recognize some of them, but every bar has characters. And I know you don't have the benefit of having the composite in front of you, but one of the things, and I shouldn't say a character, but what's unique is this on this whole page here. This is like the 1958, so a little before you, but there's really only one woman in the bar, and I think her name was Schober.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, talk about her.
Oh, you must have heard about her.
Yeah.
No, what's Schober? Yeah. What's her first name?
Was Mary?
Mary. Mary was Tom Heffernan. We go back to the same thing. Yeah. Was his secretary. She was his secretary for years. She was upstairs over the the HSC Bank back in the 50s. There came a time when Tom Heffernan, I think he died, or he must have retired, but he was no longer, and this has got to be in the very late 50s or early 60s, because Mary had been Tom's secretary for, I'm going to say, like 20 years or something. I mean, it was a long time like that. And at that time, somewhere there was where somebody who would serve that type of thing in the law office surroundings could apply to pass the bar, that she could take the bar and take it.
The law. She read
Right, read the law. That's exactly what she did. And he, well, the bottom line is that she did become an attorney. And she worked out of her house up on Central Avenue. Mary was just an old-fashioned person in a lot of regards. She had never married. She had two sisters. One, actually, the sisters was my art teacher in Dunkirk High School. But I knew Mary for years. I mean, because at the time the two offices were side by side. You know, my father and Mary, and Mary was admitted, and she continued to practice. Drove a lot of attorneys nuts because she did most of her legal work or whatever she's doing at night.
I heard that.
Right, and you drive by up in Upper Central Avenue, and you'd go by and you'd look through because she lived there and see all her lights are on. And here's 10 o'clock at night, and everybody's saying, Mary's out practicing law right now, and you drive the attorneys because she wants to have a real estate closing. She's talking about midnight, whenever it is, and the attorney wants to close it, sometime during the day, and getting Mary to do it and what have you. She was, she primarily did estate work and real estate. Those are the only two things I ever remember.
Right.
I mean, she was fine as far as I was concerned. She was, she was doing it. But the funny one that happened was that after she was admitted to the bar, and I don't know how much time elapsed after that, but election for the city court judge came up. And the one who was city court judge at the time was Ray Barkowiak. Did you know Ray?
I did, yeah.
Okay. And he was the city court judge. I'm sure I was admitted to the bar by this time. I'm sure it was. But the election was held, and lo and behold, Mary won.
Oh, okay.
And Ray Barkowiak was only Ray Barkowiak. You talk about characters. He would go around and say he was the only attorney judge that was defeated by a shopping bag, because Mary, no matter where she was, she went shopping, she always had a shopping bag with her like that. His comment was, the only judge to be defeated by a shopping bag. God. And he never said it quietly. He'd be at a bar association meeting and you'd hear him all over the thing. So I don't know whether Mary joined the bar, but I don't think she ever came to a meeting. But she was at it for a long time. Yeah. She was.
Did you feel like she was an equal at this point? Because she was really one of one in the Northern County Bar.
Oh, I think she, I think she did. I think she thought she knew what she was doing. She learned law with Tom Heffernan for many, many years. He probably got more education directly through him than some guy going to law school, as a practical matter. So I think she did. Yeah, she never cowtailed anybody, or anything like that, or talked out of something. She defended her, especially in real estate and estates. Those are the two things that she would handle. So,
my most recent interview was with Lydia Romer. Lydia Romer, and Lydia first, she knew I was coming here, And she goes, Greg, you got to remind Bill of his prosecution of me. People versus Rover.
Oh, God.
And, do you remember that at all?
Oh, sure, I remember it. I don't remember the details of it.
I'll give you a little background on what she told, because I listened to it on the way up. I put on my iPhone and I listened to it, and essentially she went through a light or something like that. I can't remember, it was an accident, and she hit a police car. It
was at the intersection of Route 60 and Lakeview Road, I think. Yeah. Somewhere in that, yes.
So she hit a police car. And then she went and fessed up. I'm the guy that just hit your car. And then he got a ticket. And then you prosecuted her, because she pled not guilty, and got a conviction. And then she took it up on appeal to Judge Adams. And Adams had, as a clerk at the time, Lydia's friend Sue Amsler.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And it was overturned, and the basic decision was accidents happen. Judge Adams.
Right.
Do you remember anything about that?
I got to say, I do remember the initiating part of it, but I do remember it also because when Lydia's sitting as a town justice, and I was there as a prosecutor. This is out in the town of Sheridan, not in open court or anything, but we were in chambers with the state police or everything. She let it be known that I was a district attorney that prosecuted her. She wouldn't let it, she wouldn't let it go. Always said it. That there are a lot of different settings too. At a bar association meeting, come up and he says, "I was prosecuted by Bill Foley." Jesus, that was another part. It kind of bothered me because I could probably tell you other attorneys that got themselves in DWI situations. I'd rather not mention the names, but you tended to think as long as there wasn't any injuries and nothing like that, maybe they get a break in the first time around. But a couple of them, 2 and 3, and they're one. I remember specifically that I prosecuted as a DWI, and never got spoken to again, but I did it. I just said, I had to do.
Sure.
That's, and they make sure that that nobody's being cheated by, in the sense that anybody was injured or anything like that. Didn't do it. But yes, I do remember that one.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of other prominent ones, but I'm not going to go there.
I'm not going to ask you to.
Because they're still alive and still practicing.
Yeah. There was certainly an active defense bar. We've mentioned a couple already today, Bruce Carpenter and maybe Charlie Loveland.
Right.
Who were some of the other guys that you would frequently see on the other side?
Well, the one I always saw way back was Lee Adams. Lee Adams was top of the shelf when it came to most vehicle and traffic, especially the speeding type. And he traveled the circuit. As far as on the northern end, and I would sure went into and he got a reputation in the vehicle and traffic thing, is Lee will get you out of it, or whatever your problem. And it went on for a while. Lee was, the state trooper, for example, would come on, he would testify that they tested by the tuning forks, and the machine was operating, and I don't know what other things like that. But Lee Adams, his favorite thing to do was when we were estimating speeds. I forget all the detail, but the officer was relying on some instrument that he used, and then Lee would sit there with a calculator, and he would figure out the speed thing, how fast somebody was going in that, and he would stand up with the judge and say, I know he wasn't doing 40 miles an hour, whatever it is. And he got a reputation that he, got to a point where we brought that to a screeching halt. He said, Lee, if you want to try the case, we'll try the case right here and now. We did, and it didn't continue to work because the judges saw that they didn't have to follow him if he didn't, what he was telling wasn't actual law, you know. But he was, and he could be very deliberate. He was, and he's, you know, he's as smart as a whip, you know. But it got to a point where he just, I always maintain he decided to run for county judge because he wasn't winning the stuff in the justice courts anymore. So I don't try anybody else. Paul Cambria, yeah. Paul, you know, he come back home, you know, and he was always good, you know. He always, you know. I won't tell that one, you know. But
Bert Snyder, did he do defense work?
Oh yeah, Bert was another one. Yeah, he was good at it. You know, he did it too, and he was a lot like Lee Adams. You know, he put this case together, but there was always something that I don't want to say left out, but it just didn't flow all the time. Especially the judges got more aggressive themselves, or at least learned more. I don't know whether they were going to justice school or what, or they were more than just the common farmer who became a judge, and they began to know more what there was expected of them, you know. And the one I remember as far as a judge is concerned, always did, was Mabel O'Connell. Remember Mabel? Mabel O'Connell. It was the classic. I loved the lady, and her daughter was very nice. But we would have trials on her kitchen table, and maybe at night, and all the dishes were now pushed into the sink, and the trial would take place on the kitchen table. And who was the one? Oh, what's his name from Jamestown? The big-headed, red-headed guy. Oh, I can't remember. I can see him, but I can't remember him. And he went through one of the trials there with Mabel, and Mabel would periodically get up while the trial was going on. She had to get a drink of water, or she had to go to the bathroom or anything like that, and we'd just sit there like this, and we'd wait, you know. But, oh, what was his name? He was a Jamestown attorney.
Is that Ed Fagan at the time?
No, that's not him. I'd forgotten. Fagan, I remember him. No, this was, oh, what the devil. His wife was a hairdresser. Well, I can't remember. But he couldn't take it that night because Mabel really found his client guilty or whatever it was, and I don't know whether she spent enough time listening, but she did. And she was a justice for a long time up there in Stockton, you know. But boy, those days have changed, you know.
So I know another one that would frequently be involved in the defense work was Tony. Tony did a lot of defense work, didn't he?
Span?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. He did most of his on the felony level, you know. But Tony actually was more interested in the civil ones. He likes the DWI type of things like that. So, yeah, he did.
Dick Whipple, was he part of that?
I remember him. Peter Clark, you know, was very good at it. I mean, he stayed good. I mean, he knew as much as anybody how to conduct in trials and in benefits for his client. Whipple, he did, but of course Whipple ended up being a judge.
Well, I just forgot, yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of those older people.
Because you were in the DA's office, you obviously public defenders are also, you see them a lot. did you see who was normally assigned out here in the North County as the public defender's office?
Well, for the longest time was not Loveland. We mentioned him earlier. Carpenter.
Yeah.
He was for a long time. I'm trying to think who else was out here. Well, as I say, for a long time, of course, Peter Clark, you know, and I'm trying to think about him. You know, if I had to sort of jog my memory on those, but I never had a complaint about anything that any public defender thing did that I didn't like or didn't approve of, anything like that. Never really anything like that.
Were there other town judges that sort of were unique, you know, in the North County? I mean, we certainly have traditionally some names down in the South County of guys, you know.
Oh, what was the one that had set up the speeding court in his front yard on a card table?
Yeah.
Oh, remember him? I went before him once. I can't remember what his name is.
It was sort of summary justice.
It was. I'm trying to think. Yeah, there were. I was amazed at the number of that were town justices that knew enough that if they didn't know the real answer, they'd find the real answer. They weren't just firing from the hip or anything like that. You had two in Silver Creek, Judge Ward and Judge Fox. And Judge Ward was a different person. He was from Silver Creek originally. He was an older man. He, in many ways, I think, thought he was a Supreme Court justice. He was very formal in a lot of things he would do. He would try to answer legal questions. He was there for the longest. Nice guy, and his wife was friendly. He used to get me the magistrate. He was president of the magistrates of Chautauqua County too, and he would get me once in a while to become their speaker when something new was developing or like that. We'd go to their dinner or something like that, and he and his wife would go, and they would usually they'd pick me up, and we'd go to. I know we went over to Cattaraugus County once. I don't know why now, but we did, and I had to speak over there for some reason. But he was, and just but he very formal. The other judge there was Judge Fox, and Judge Fox was a very nice person, very practical. He wasn't trying to show off as far as his knowledge, but he was there for a very long time. When we finally retired, both of them, I'm not sure whether Ward retired or not, but come back to Ward, in Silver Creek at that time, there was Judge Ward and there was Judge Ward. Judge Ward was the town justice or village justice. I think he was village justice, and the other Ward was his first name? Ward, who was the Supreme Court justice. John, is that right?
Yeah.
And he lived in the town of Hanover.
Oh, that's right.
And a lot of times people would mix the two wards up because the Justice Ward really didn't always say, I'm not the other ward. I mean, he gave you the impression that he should be the Supreme Court Justice Ward. And he kind of acted like he thought it was a Justice Ward. But they were just two entirely different persons. Both of them very nice, very incapable. I mean, there was nothing there was no real shortcomings. If they didn't know the law, they would ask the DA. Supposedly, that was my job, to keep the courts informed of the legal questions.
I'm looking at a composite here, and I'm just going to, of the Bar Association, rifle off a couple names here. If you have a story or two. Charlie Colasano.
Charlie Colasano was, again, a great a lawyer, and he did very, very well as a civil law in the Supreme Court. Automobile situations, injuries, and what have you. But he did participate as in the justice court type of things. He would get very dramatic, and he'd get kind of upset at me if I would do something or produce something that he didn't like. Or I can always remember there was one case he had, the defendant was DWI. It was like his second DWI, and he's driving north on Central Avenue in the village of Fredonia, and the police found, but he drove from right up towards the village itself all the way to the city line at night, totally on the wrong lane, like that. And the Fredonia police saw him when he's going down this way, and they stopped him. And fortunately, no accident or anything else, but the guy was snuck to the,
Yeah.
And Charlie's, I always remember his closing address to the jury, that he kept saying, what was it he saying? Something about the police saying he was lying. He said something like, "This is the most preposterous allegation. The fact that a person could drive that, it was preposterous that he could be on the wrong side of the thing." And he kept using the word preposterous, like that. The jury came and convicted him, but
yeah.
so.
Well, I got a sense that he could walk into a room and sort of like a politician, and just talk.
Right. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Right. Oh yes. Right. He was. Yep.
John Foster. I vaguely remember John, but was he part of your world at all?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In the initial parts, yeah. John. Geez, that's great. I'm not. Am I? I don't. I really, for some reason in the back of my mind, I have the impression that he was a town justice at one time, or right. But he primarily did defendant work on it. He tended to want to go to trial a lot. I mean, that was his threat to me. Okay, if you can't do this for me, we're going to go to trial. We'll go to trial. He was active. He was an active attorney in that field, but he is also active in the civil side of it too. I know he did practice a lot of motor vehicle type of accidents. Other than that, John, his wife was Sherry Foster. They lived right up here, and there came a time when they divorced, and then he married another woman, and then I knew the other woman too. And besides that, I can't remember a lot of anything that would stand out that he wasn't doing his thing.
Ed Coosdale, city attorney for seemingly ever. He was
city attorney. Yeah, he was a good city attorney. He was a Democrat in the Democratic side of it. He was, and justly so, proud of his military history, and he was in. I'm pretty sure he was in at the end of the Second World War. Maybe he was in. No, he couldn't have been in the Korean War. I don't think. I think he was later that, but he was very good at what he did, as far as I'm concerned. He would like to settle cases as far as vehicle and traffic is concerned, but everybody did. So.
Tony Rizzo. Do you know him? I mean,
oh yeah. Tony Rizzo was the one I was trying to think of earlier. Was Tony Rizzo the only other Democrat?
I think you're right.
I think he was when I said he and my father and the judge Jackson were the only Democrat. Tony was Tony had several clients, and he always wanted to settle vehicle and traffic. I never really went into anything that I stand out about any major criminal thing or anything, even if it was a misdemeanor. He mainly stuck pretty close to the vehicle and traffic, including DWIs. But all I remember about him, what did he do? Did he live next door to or live above the liquor store in his offices in Brockton? And it just, it just kind of struck me funny that his law office was the way it did. I don't know, that was just kind of childish on my part, but it just always struck me because that's what stood out when you went by. It wasn't his sign necessarily, but his sign was next to the window, and it was at a liquor store. So,
give me your best Judge Ricotta story.
Oh boy. I'm trying to think of. I am right now, right off the top of my head. I practiced a lot of it, but I'm just trying to think of anything that would stick in my mind.
He was a Dunkirk attorney. Then he became Supreme Court judge. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He was very Republican. And that one great. I just can't think of anything. I appeared for him. I didn't do a lot of Supreme Court stuff, but I did, some, and always appeared before him. And of course, his biggest aid and thing was Tom Muldowney.
Yeah. He
was his. The two of them, in many instances, were inseparable. And and I was a very good friend of Tom Muldowney, and still am. And he would tell me some, not really serious things, but tell me things that were happening in the courtroom or what happened, things like that. But that's about as close as I can relate anything to Joe.
I'm gonna get this part right. Was it Bob Daley? Not Bill Daley. Bob Daley.
Bob Daley.
Yeah.
Bob Daley was in with Summer and Colasano, and Bob did trial work in vehicle and traffic. The one thing about Bob Daley was that he was very smart or educated or whatever, but very, you sensed, that, almost sensed that firm hired him because he had the ability to legally dip into things, I was always impressed with Bob, and he, as an attorney, I have nothing I can ever say that he's ever did that would be either funny, humorous, or upset me. It didn't. But as I say, that's the impression I had, was his either his education background or just his natural ability to express himself. But he seemed to be what I may call the brains of that firm, and if they needed a problem,
Bill Aller.
Oh yeah.
It's funny, I'm looking at the name, and I just, in fact, I came up here, we were affiliated with Jim Summer,
right,
Colasano Summer Needs, and I was we merged Phillips Lytle, and so Bill was. All these guys were sort of at the end of their roles. But, so tell me a little bit about him.
Very intelligent. I mean, book type intelligence is the way I get it. He was in firm. It was a firm. What was it? What was the other? But the two of them, and he had an office in Dunkirk. I'm trying to think what the other firm is. The partner in that firm was a partner, but he really never. He came to Dunkirk once in a while, but he mainly was in Buffalo. It really wasn't. I keep wanting to say it's Wheeler and Aller, but that's not Wheeler. I'd have to think about what the firm was. Somehow, my recollection is that the other partner was in some way related to Bill. Bill was in World War II. He came out and I'm going to get the sequence messed up, but he came out, he again, as I say, he was a smart individual, did most of his practice in real estate and business. Bill, I know, had a drinking problem, and eventually he just didn't drink. I mean, he just went absolutely without drinking at all. He was married to Peg Aller, who was a friend of my mother's, and she's a very talented woman. I'm trying to think of. There was a story, but I don't want to. No, I don't want to tell it now. This one, that's.
No, that's okay.
All right.
Discretion is the better part of valor.
Valley.
Yeah. Charlie Loveland, we talked about him, but Charlie must have been kind of that guy who walks in a room. He's a big guy, presence, and not shy.
Right, and that's just about what you say about him. You know, he was just that. You know, he was. You knew he was in the room, and he would try. He didn't really try many cases. Of course, he ended up being a judge himself, and I'm pretty sure he was a public defender at one time too.
He was, yeah.
You know, Charlie was Charlie, as far as he never did anything that I can think of that would warrant what you might call a good story. I mean,
was there whether public defenders or a private attorney, somebody, just person that kind of got under your skin? Just you knew he walked in the room, he was just gonna. Your defenses all of a sudden rose. You know, it's kind of like, oh man.
why me, right?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, because I just can't remember. There were a couple of Buffalo attorneys like that, and I'm trying to think of one right off the top of my head. But they would come in. As they say, the surprising part, it kind of set them back when they found out that Augie couldn't see anything, and they had their case wrapped around something that they were going to do something with the judge and show, but that kind of blew it. But there a lot of them would come, and we're out in this little dinky city, and we're going to take this thing, and they're all going to listen to us, and I'm trying to think of one of the firms. Oh. Barry Covert.
Yeah.
Barry, I liked Barry, but I mean, he still came on strong. I mean, he was going to show us all what law is, But he's done well, and he's on Channel 2 a couple of times,
yeah.
right? They send him as for the advice, and he really has changed.
Yeah.
I can remember when he was, I don't know, counselor or something to the Buffalo Bills too, and he had box up there in the stadium, and Paul Cambria,
Mm-hmm.
you know, Paul earned his. There's another one though. I don't know. Well, I had this one because he says it too. He will in a gathering. I haven't seen Paul for a couple of years or so, but he would be in a gathering of people, or actually in Buffalo. I ran into him. This is well, several years ago, but it carries the same theme for it. He's at table. I'm walking through some restaurant in there with Gene, and I see him at the table, and I say, "Hi, Paul," because he was from Fredonia, and his father, and and then he would tell everybody at the table, he's the DA that prosecuted me and found me guilty. So he does. He says, and he did. This is before, I think he was either in high school or in law school, and he got caught for speeding or something of that minor age, and at the time I prosecuted him and found guilty, and every time he gets a chance, I will say this, that in many times I end up having a drink served to the table if I'm not, for Paul, for Gene and me, in celebration of I being the only one that prosecuted and convicted Paul Cambria. Oh. So, and to the credit, he remembers me, I guess. I don't know, but he does. So but he he's earned his stripes.
He sure has. He was at the Jackson Center, and he gave a speech one time with freedom of First Amendment stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Larry Flint, Hustler. All
Sure,
that
right.
Stuff.
Yep. Yeah.
It's all fascinating. Just a couple quick names, and I know I've taken up a lot of your time.
That's fine.
It's been such a hoot. But Ed Fagan Ed was flamboyant as can be, and certainly got on the wrong side of Judge Adams. Did he come up to North County at all?
I got to tell you, dude, I just cannot. I remember him. I remember a couple of incidences in Jamestown. I don't know whether I got involved in an argument. I do remember there was something in Jamestown that, I don't know, when Bob Seidel was the DA over there, and there was something that took place with Fagan, but I just don't recall. I don't recall enough even to tell you what the story, but I remember it was something that was criminal in nature, and he'd pulled something, and beyond that I can't tell you.
Yeah.
I did not. I had probably no great fondness for him.
He was out there. You practiced for so many years. Was there a point, though, Bill, when you said an aha moment? You're 34 years as assistant district attorney, saying enough, and what triggered that?
Well, actually, the total thing from the law career was 48 years.
Oh my God.
Well, 3 of those I include the Air Force in, right? But I decided I didn't want to do the I wanted to just settle back. I just didn't want. So I think I retired. Took my retirement after 34 years. Somewhere in about, I think it was 1940. No, 40. It was about 1996 or somewhere in there. Somewhere in there that I retired from that. And then at that time, David had come in the office, was in the office, and David was practicing, and so I'm beginning to think that was one of the reasons I got out of the DA's office. Not that I'd been anything that it had just gotten enough, you know. And David's there, and I continued with the private practice with Jeff, but I had cut back too, because by that time we had bought the place in Florida, and so Gene and I were gone usually 3 months out of the year, and so I wasn't really carrying the load, but gave most of it to David, and then David ran for the DA's. When David ran for the DA's office and won, that's when I decided I'm out of here, because up to that time I said I'd been going to stay here, you know, as long as David's in the firm, a member of the firm, I would stay here. But the moment and that was, at the time I quit, I think I was 73. And the reason I quit is because David was gone. And I just told Jeff I don't really, you know, stay around here. So
how did you connect with Jeff? Now the firm itself, Foley, and Passifero, but ultimately that was your dad and you, who was Foley and Foley. I assume it was Albert W. Foley at one point, then Foley and Foley.
Right.
And then Foley and Passifero.
Right.
Well, now, Jeff he's a Dunkirk guy, but
Fredonia guy. Fredonia.
Yeah.
His that was kind of a, I don't know, completely a fluke, because we had built the office. I built the office in 19. For some reason, the figure sticks in my mind. Somewhere around 1976, 1977, I think. And my father was, you know, he was there in the office. He was reading the Wall Street Journal in the morning. His friends would drop in and talk with him. He would go to lunch at Shorewood, and then he usually went home. So it's me. So I knew I had to get somebody in there. And we had the new office, and I'm trying to think. Jeff had just graduated from law school, and I think he had just passed the bar too. And somebody in town mentioned that he was looking for a position, and I really can't remember how the actual commission, whether I called his father or I called him or something to see if he would want to come in and just get started with it. Just in nothing, I needed somebody to help, you know.
Sure.
And I stuck in my mind it was 1976, 77, somewhere in there. He came in and we talked, and I said to him, you know, I said, I can't pay you a lot of money, because I think I can't remember whether he had just passed the bar or he was just about to take the bar. Whatever it was, it didn't warrant a big paycheck or anything like that. I don't even know what it was, probably dirt, but he wanted to do it because I think Jeff wanted to stay in this area to begin with. And of course, back then, there was still a pretty healthy allotment of attorneys in this area. Right. And from that moment on, he came in and, you know, he did what young attorneys do. And my father got further and further away of it. And then my father just stopped. Well, my father died in '84. But Jeff was, I know Jeff was in here when he died. Actually, Jeff had a couple of times, my father went on a cruise around the world, and Jeff, I didn't know anything how to go to New York City and get him on one of those great big ships, you know. But Jeff did. Yeah. So he and my father go, and he sticks him on the ship, you know. And so he's back, and we just decided that, in a sense, we're going to, I said, as far as I'm concerned, we're going to be partners.
Sure.
And I know this will probably strike you, so you're an idiot. But from that time on until today, we don't have a paper between us.
Yeah.
We have no agreements, no partnership agreements, no nothing. And when I walked out of there, I said, Jeff, the place is yours, except the building, I want you to pay me rent.
Yeah.
And that's what he's doing. But even that's not in writing.
I bet it's more than $50.
It's more than $50, yes. It's more than $50. But it's very comfortable for him, very comfortable for me, and it's just been the same, but it's been the same amount now, what, for 14 years?
Good for you. Good for
So
you.
so I think that says something for the two of us, you know. So
Well, he respects you tremendously. You knew I was coming out here, Bill. We've tried a couple of times, and I have had to cancel. But in anticipation of that, was there some question that you thought I was going to ask that I haven't asked yet?
not really.
Yeah.
I don't know of anything. It's kind of an open book, not very exciting or anything like that. I mean,
Very exciting. This is your history.
well, to that extent, but I honestly wish that my father's booklets and things of his notes that diaries he kept were around. I bugged my sister. I can't find them. I know they're somewhere, but and I would really like to have it. You know, he did one when he went to Europe after the Second World War. You know, did you know about that story? Right after the Second World War, and I'm talking about, well, the war ended in August of 45. He had a client by the name of Bill Cease. Bill Cease was the man who developed the frozen food, particularly the frozen food pies in this area. He ran a restaurant around here.
Over the thruway, too.
At one time, yes, they eventually ceased. But he had a restaurant on Central Avenue, and then he had a bigger restaurant on Lakeshore Drive.
Yes.
And he was in the commissary business, too, because he was, at the time, somewhere along the line, he had providing the food to Ford Motors, but I think that came later. But he was a good friend of my father's, and he did my father did his legal work, and sometime between that time in August and the 1st of December, actually 1st of January, this guy gets an invitation from the British government to come over there and show them what this thing is about, frozen foods and how you do it. So he gets my father interested. He says, I'm going to have an attorney with me, and so he talks my father into doing it. So somewhere after the 1st of January, he and Mr. Cease leave the Buffalo airport. They fly to Newfoundland. In Newfoundland, they get into a DC-6 or DC-3 to fly to Ireland. The seating and the heating in this thing was they had to wear mucklucks. They had to wear very heavy overcoats and things like that because the doggone plane didn't have much of a heating system. They fly into Dublin, and they're there, and I don't know how they're going to go from there because they're going to go to England. The only thing that my father ever told the story on that one is he's in Dublin, and he wanted to drink, and he wanted Irish whiskey. So he's standing at the bar, and he orders, and apparently his demeanor, everything else, even the way he talked, in Ireland, he was spotted as an American. And my father ordered the Irish whiskey,
Hennessy?
It wasn't Hennessy either. Whatever it was, there's the other one. Oh God, Bill, whatever it was, my father ordered it, and standing next to him were two huge Catholic priests, all in coats and things like that, but you knew they were Catholic priests and they were big like that. And one of the priests turned to him and he said, "Young man, you're in southern Ireland. Down here we drink John Jameson." So my father always told that story. Well, anyways, they went on into England and they met for it, and they were in England, I think, something like 3 to 4 weeks. And in his diary, because this is, I mean, right then it was a question not whether England was going to survive from being starving to death. I mean, literally, they were eating Brussels sprouts until the cows, and it was just like that. So he was there with him, whatever they were doing, showing the English government what it is and how you frozen food, and they were surviving on whatever food they could get or made available to them. They did a little traveling down to Cardiff in Wales, and during that time, the Swedish government got wind of the fact that Mr. Cease was in the area, so to speak, and they asked him if he would come to Sweden and do the same thing, to show them about frozen food. So the two of them packed up and they flew to Sweden for a very short period of time. I can't remember all that deep. But the amazing thing is, my father said, we get to Sweden, we have all the food we want. Because they were neutral. Yeah. And their systems were not destroyed or anything like that. He said just totally available to them. And the next thing that I know is that they packed up and they flew home. And I don't know too much about it.
What an experience.
Wow. It was. I mean, we're talking six months after the Second World ended, in Europe. And nobody's really being to do except something like Sweden. And he comes home and he did do the circuit. I will say this, my father did the circuit of every club, the Rotary, this, that, here, between Westfield and Buffalo. He was being invited to describe what he found out in Europe 6 months after the war. So he had a lot of dinners he attended, and he ate well too in here. But now he kept notes. I know that he did, and I can't find them.
My recollection, I met your dad a few times, but I remember his voice. Mm-hmm. Kind of a deep bass voice.
Right. Well, that's how he got the position of being in that choir, the national choir, because he loved to sing. And the thing is that the two of them, that you got my father and Ed O'Connor living here, and I wasn't here at the time, but my father would stand right out here in his porch and he would yell, "Edwin, it's cocktail time," and they would decide which one they would go to, one here or one here. But and the same thing, Ed would do the same. Ed's voice was practically the same level as my father's on the thing, but the two of them enjoyed being company with each other. And they were both pretty much retired at the time this was all happening. So that's one of the little vignettes that I have. But I wished I had the notes. I really do, because they would be interested to get the real details of what happened, So
this is fabulous. This is great, Bill. I really enjoyed this.
Well, I hope it didn't bore you to death.